Imagine you were at a job interview and they asked you to estimate how much money a cinema makes in one day. Do you have any idea where to start? And if that question's not weird enough, what if they asked you how many iPhones fit in a bathtub? Using a little bit of maths and some clever thinking, in this video I'm going to show you how to tackle tricky questions like these two. This is Mr. Butler Maths, and in this video we are looking at estimation. We're going to break these complicated questions down into 4 steps. The first step is to clarify the question. The second step involves breaking down the question until you're left with parts that you actually know. The third step is to move from the information that you do know using rounding and calculations to answer the question. But we're not done there. We have one final step, and that is to do a reality check of your answer. While you may not know for sure whether your answer is very close to the correct answer, there are some answers that you should be able to rule out, and that's what we're doing in the reality check. Let's take our cinema question, and let's try and clarify it. Initially, we started with the question, how much money does a cinema make a day? A cinema might make money from ticket sales, but it also might make money from popcorn and drinks and ice cream. But in this case, we're just focusing on ticket sales. But we can go further than this. Does this include how much money the cinema has to spend on paying their staff and paying for electricity? That is, are we interested in the revenue, which is how much money the cinema brings in, or the profit, which is how much money the cinema brings in, take away how much money the cinema has to spend on providing all of these services? And to keep things simple for ourselves, let's assume that we're just focused on revenue. So our new clarified question that we're going to tackle is how much revenue does a cinema make a day just from ticket sales? That's a tricky question. I don't know the answer to that question. However, I can start to break it down. We're just focusing on ticket sales. So to work out how much money a cinema makes from ticket sales, I need to know 2 things. I need to know how many tickets are sold each day and how much does one ticket cost. The questions that I think I can answer, I'm going to mark in yellow. While I might be able to have a good stab at how much one ticket costs from my own experience of going to the cinema, I have no idea how many tickets are sold a day, so I'm going to need to break that question down further. And I'm going to break it into how many films are shown a day and how many tickets are sold for each film. And if I multiplied that together, that would give me how many tickets are sold a day. But I still don't know the answer to either of those questions. So let's try and break it down again further. I can break how many films are shown a day into 2 parts. Firstly, how many screens are there in a cinema, and how many films are shown on each screen each day. I can have a good crack at how many screens there are, just again from my personal experience of going to a cinema, but I don't know how many films are shown on each day. I'm going to need to do a little bit more work to get an answer to that. Let's now turn to the question of how many tickets are sold for each film. Again, I don't know the answer to that yet, but I can still break it down. And I can break it down into how many seats there are in each cinema and what percentage of those seats are filled. Let's turn back to the second part of my tree. I want to work out how many films are shown on each screen each day. To work this out, I could take into account how long each film is and how many hours a day the cinema is open for. Now that I've broken down this question, I think I can have a good stab at all of these yellow questions, so let's try and work through it. How long is each film? Well, some films are 2 hours, some films are a bit longer than 2 hours. I'm going to call it 3 hours, because that gives time for adverts and things like that as well. And I'm choosing nice numbers that are easy to work with. I'm not worried about being too precise here. How many hours a day is the cinema open? Well, some cinemas are open till midnight, and they have morning showings starting at 9. So we can call that 15 hours. I also know that there are roughly 10 screens in my local cinema. There might be a few more, but 10 is a nice round number to work with when we're doing these calculations. How many seats are there in each cinema? Well, some cinemas are smaller than others. Some probably have about 50 and some have over 100. So again, I'm just going to take 100, which is a nice round number. It's not going to be perfectly precise, but it's going to be near enough. And what percentage of seats are filled? Some films are going to be really busy, some are going to be quite quiet. I'd say on average, about 50% of seats are filled. And that leaves me with my final yellow question, which is how much does one ticket cost? From my experience, one ticket normally costs about £10. Some cinemas are cheaper, some are more expensive, but £10 is a nice number to work with. So now we have these yellow questions answered, let's try and work our way up the tree, answering our other questions. So let's start with how many films are shown on each screen each day? Well, if the cinema is open for 15 hours and each film is 3 hours, that means we could fit in 5 films on each screen every day. So now I know that there are 10 screens and there are 5 films shown on each screen. That means I can estimate that there are 50 films shown a day. I can also work my way up the other branch. If there are 100 seats in the cinema and I reckon 50% are filled, that means we're selling about 50 tickets every cinema showing. Now, if I know there are 50 films a day and 50 tickets are sold for every film, I can estimate that 2,500 tickets are sold a day by multiplying those two numbers together. Before, I would have had no idea how to get an answer like that. But just by breaking it down, I've managed to get there. So if 2,500 tickets are sold a day, and each ticket costs around £10, that means, as an estimate, the cinema makes £25,000 a day. Is my answer exactly correct? Well, it's very unlikely that it's exactly correct. But with these kind of questions, often interviewers are testing your ability to break a question down and to work logically, especially when presented with an unfamiliar situation or a question you don't know how to answer. They want to test you to see how you respond in that environment. And this is a very good way to respond. Now, we had one final step, and that was the reality check. Is my answer of £25,000 a day realistic? And remember, we're asking if that's a realistic amount of revenue. We're not looking at profit. Otherwise, £25,000 of profit would be a lot, but £25,000 a day of revenue might be realistic. The way I like to think about these is, what numbers would not make sense? Well, if I got an answer smaller than £250, I'd be very surprised, because I know one ticket costs £10, and I reckon that cinemas sell more than 25 tickets a day. Alternatively, if a cinema made £2.5 million a day, that seems far too big. Now, there's quite a big range in between those numbers, in which my answer falls, but it's still good to do that reality check, just in case you've done one of these calculations wrong. Let's now move on to my second question, which was, how many iPhones fit in a bathtub? Again, our first step is to clarify the question. There are lots of different iPhones, and they are lots of different sizes. Some iPhones are twice as big as other iPhones. So let's specify. Let's just limit it to how many iPhone 10s fit in a bathtub. And you might also be wondering if it depends whether or not those iPhone 10s are intact. Perhaps if we smashed them and crushed them down, we could fit loads and loads in the bathtub. Let's just focus on the question of how many intact iPhone 10s fit in a bathtub. And let's try and break that down. So I'm going to work through a very similar process again. So what two things do I need to know how many iPhones fit in a bathtub? Well, I need to know how big an iPhone is, and I need to know how big the bathtub is. When we're talking about big with this question, we mean volume. In the case of the iPhone, how much space does the iPhone take up? And in the case of the bathtub, we think about volume in terms of how much space is there within the bathtub for me to put stuff, in this case, iPhones. So how do I calculate volume? I need to know three things. I need to know how long the iPhone is, how wide the iPhone is, and how thick the iPhone is. And I'm going to mark those in yellow because I think I can have a good stab at all of those without doing any further calculations. How big is a bathtub? Again, I need to know the same three things. I need to know how long it is, how wide it is, and in this case, we're thinking more about how deep it is rather than how thick it is. It's still the 3 dimensions, but it makes more sense to think about how deep it is rather than how thick it is. So let's try and fill in some numbers. Again, we're not necessarily going to measure an iPhone and use the exact measurement because that would be quite difficult to work with. Instead, we're going to round to a nice number that we can work with. So how long is an iPhone? It's about 10 centimeters long. To be honest, it's probably a little bit longer than 10 centimeters, but 10 centimeters is a nice number to work with. How wide is an iPhone? Well, it's maybe about half that, so maybe it's 5 centimeters wide. And how thick is an iPhone? Probably about a centimeter, maybe a little bit less, but all of these measurements will balance out in the rounding process. Now let's turn to a bathtub. How long is a bathtub? Well, average height person can't quite lie down in it, but they can stretch out a bit. So let's call that 160 centimeters because that'll actually be a nice number to work with. How wide is a bathtub? Well, an average sized person can definitely fit in it. So let's say about 50 centimeters. And it's probably about as deep as it is wide. So again, let's call that 50 centimeters. Now we're going to work our way back up the tree, doing some calculations. To find the volume, we multiply the 3 dimensions together. So the volume of an iPhone is approximately going to be 50 centimeters cubed. And we get that from doing 10 times 5 times 1. How big is a bathtub? Well, again, we're going to multiply these 3 dimensions together. And this time we're going to get an answer of 40,000 centimeters cubed. Now, my final calculation, I have to be careful here, and this is where a reality check will help me. I don't want to multiply these two together. Instead, I want to see how many iPhones fit into the bathtub. So if we share the space of the bathtub between iPhones, how many iPhones will fit into it? The operation I want to be doing is dividing. So I want to divide 40,000 by 50. And when I do that, I get 800 iPhones. And that's my estimated answer to this question. Is that a realistic answer? Well, let's do a reality check. If I got an answer as small as 8, I definitely know that couldn't be right. And then if I got an answer as big as 8 million, I'd have some second thoughts. I'd be questioning myself a little bit. That's how the reality check helps us. It helps catch us when we make those silly mistakes. And I think I'm going to leave it there for this video. As always, leaving a like really helps other people find my videos. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to find your way back for more maths content. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks, guys.